Sharing with Rome and Florence the triumph of the High Renaissance was the Republic of Venice. The art of Venice emerged in the 15th and 16th centuries as a distinctly different form of art. Venice's long association with Northern Europe and the Byzantine East fostered a different development, pace, and set of ideals. It is without question that the Venetian artists of the High and Late Renaissance produced works every bit the equal of their Roman and Florentine counterparts. Chief among Venetian architects was Palladio, who joins Alberti, Brunelleschi, and Bramante as the major Renaissance architects. High Renaissance architecture was brought to Venice by Sansovino, a Florentine, and Palladio succeeded Sansovino as chief architect of the Venetian Republic, and in so doing contributed a uniquely Venetian aspect to Renaissance architecture. This is Andrea Palladio's Villa Rotonda, and Palladio was known for his villas and palaces. The Villa Rotonda, while not most typical of his style, makes clear Palladio's debt to classical architecture with its Greek and Roman details, such as porticos with Ionic columns, a pantheon-like dome, and a symmetrical and central arrangement. This is a design of brilliant light, with each of the 4 wings having 3 exposed walls and 4 windows. While not Palladio's best-known work, his greatest triumph was the church at San Giorgio Maggiore. Palladio took on the challenge of fusing the classical elements so favored by Renaissance architects with the traditional basilica shape that was best suited to the particular needs of the Christian church. 2 temple facades are superimposed to combine forms found in this plan and suggest depth as well as function in this highly integrated design. The columns of the high, narrow nave facade are set on high plinths, and a plinths is the lowest member of a base. It's also a block serving as a base for a statue, and these plinths echo the second lower porch emphasis on horizontality. Previously, architects were displeased over the insistence on basilica plans by their patrons, and their patrons were dissatisfied with the function of the central plan church that was championed by Renaissance architects. Here, Palladio brings forth a design of challenge and satisfaction to both the architect and the patron. Palladio was enormously influential in later centuries through his treatise, 4 Books on Architecture. Neoclassical revivalists like Christopher Wren and even Thomas Jefferson, a familiar name whose work as an architect is seen in your text, used Palladio's treatise as a guide. The art of the High Renaissance in Rome and Florence was generally one concerned with sculptural forms, epic themes, and the logical application of science to art. The Venetian painters were a vastly different bunch. Concerned with color, texture, and mood, the painters of Venice brought forth a dynamic second set of values to the Renaissance. Giovanni Bellini was the last and greatest member of the Bellini family of artists. Giovanni was active for a very long time, being first recorded as a painter in 1460 and working up to the time of his death in 1516. Bellini's father was a student of Gentile da Fabriano, and he passed on the ideas of the international style to his 2 sons, Giovanni and Gentile. What we see here is the work of Gentile Bellini, and while Giovanni struggled to arrive at his own style initially, in no way was he as conservative as his brother Gentile, whose work here from approximately 1496 still owes a considerable debt to the international style in its busyness and spatial considerations. Here we see Giovanni's work, and initially it bears great resemblance to that of his brother-in-law, Mantegna. Remember Mantegna's Dead Christ. We'll now look at Mantegna's version of the Agony in the Garden, and you'll see quite clearly his influence on Giovanni. You can appreciate, then, the simple effect that a change of media can bring upon an artist's work as we move to the next slide. Giovanni Bellini's breakthrough came as a result of the artist Messina introducing him to the new technique of oil paint. Immediately, the harshness of Mantegna's style that we saw previously, as well as any lingering aspects of the international style, disappear. A burgeoning interest in the effects of natural light as well can be seen in the background landscape of this Madonna and Child by Giovanni Bellini. And this fascination with the light will mark the work of the major Venetian artists to come, two of whom will study with Bellini himself. Elements of Mantegna's work also continue to present themselves in Bellini's San Gioble altarpiece. The crisp articulation of the figures and the low eye or horizon line both recall Mantegna and are well used to contrast this piece with a later version of a similar nature. In the Madonna and Saints, we're witness to another stage of Giovanni Bellini's development, as he opens the space up by removing figures, raising the eye level, and perhaps most importantly, applying the sfumato of Leonardo. Yet here is the distinctly Venetian touch. Giovanni Bellini uses rich color, not just chiaroscuro, to achieve this remarkable fusion of figures, space, and light. This is Giovanni Bellini's Feast of the Gods, and it's a rather incredible work in light of its circumstances. How many people in their 80s come to a new style as a result of their students? Inspired by his student Giorgione, Bellini here explores the moods of nature in a new way and invents the idea of a Venetian landscape which envelops the figures and reaches out for the viewer. Giovanni Bellini defines the goal of Venetian painting with this painting, that of striking the soul rather than the intellect, as was the case with Rome. With his incredible development as an artist over a very long period, Bellini plays a role for the Venetians similar to that of Giotto for the Florentines. He is the father who made all possible and made some terrific works of his own in the process. The work was done after and in response to the death of his student Giorgione, and Titian, another student of Giovanni's, is thought to be responsible for the painting of the landscape in this piece. This is Giorgione's The Tempest, and while Giorgione was active as an artist for only a short period, he functions as a sort of fulcrum in focusing the energies of his teacher Bellini and fellow student Titian, who both lived long and vitally important lives. Mood, as opposed to meaning, is chief among Giorgione's concerns. Line and form diminish in importance in a work shrouded in mystery. Difficult to see, but very important for its presence, is a looser and more fluid paint handling than existed in Bellini's work. This point would not be lost on Titian, if in fact he did not have a hand in its initial development, and would become dominant in his work in later years. Now, not only the greatest of the Venetian painters, but one of the greatest artists of all time is Titian. Titian was equally skilled and inventive in portraiture as well as religious and mythological painting. Like Raphael, Titian's influence will be vast and far-reaching, as younger artists of his time like Veronese and Tintoretto, as well as great masters of coming generations like Rubens and Velázquez, look to him as their model. This is Titian's sacred and profane love, and in this painting he argues his case strongly for being tops in painting female beauty. Titian's sensitivity is beginning to show. Just contrast this with Raphael's Galatea to appreciate the jump in rendering the female nude, a task that Titian defined for centuries in the next painting. Here we have Venus ×2. Using a model set forth by Giorgione that we see on the right, Titian created a work of yet-to-end influence in terms of depicting the female nude. While very much akin to Giorgione's Venus, finished by Titian, Titian literally melts the figure into its environment with the glowing reds he liberally applies throughout the painting. Titian would use this reddish ground and build up his pictures in oil over that red ground so that his paintings would communicate warmth, which indeed they do. He would turn his pictures to the wall for months, then look anew as if they were his worst enemies, applying glazes to tone down colors that were too much. 30, 40 velature, he is said to have cried about the glazing or veiling process his work went through. That means 30, 40 glazes. Titian is a painter's painter. Look at the red sky at the horizon in this painting. It absolutely glows. While the man with the glove is an example of Titian's portraiture, with a handy comment built in on the composition, it is by no means characteristic of the strength of his portraits. The three-spot relationship in this work dominates the piece, as concern over the individual seems minor. By contrast, consider Titian's portrait of Doge Andrea Gritti. Excuse the pun, but this painting is certainly grittier. Not only is a powerful person revealed in the subject, but so too now is fully revealed the power of the painter. Here we can credit Titian with perhaps the most crucial discovery in the history of art. He was the first man in modern times to liberate the brush from the exact and purely descriptive manner of recording tactile surfaces, volumes, and details. Titian converted the brushstroke into a vehicle for expressing feeling. With Titian, the brushstroke now carries a burden of double responsibility. First off, description of forms. What did this man look like? Here we go. But secondly, and most importantly, he gave abstract magic to representational work by allowing the brushstroke to exist on its own as paint on a flat surface. Titian's brushstroke became even looser and worked more magic in his later years. This is Christ crowned with thorns. Now, whether because of loss of sight, patience, or pretension, Titian loads each and every brushstroke with a wealth of emotion and power, revealing to the viewer now the marvelous process of making a painting. We go now to the work of Tintoretto. And Tintoretto claimed to be a student of Titian. Yet what is conveniently left out of many of the textbooks is the fact that Titian's studio was so critical of this painting of St. Mark freeing a Christian slave that Tintoretto had it returned to his studio, where apparently it stayed for nearly 15 years. Brushing aside the apparent drawing of Michelangelo and the color of Titian, we can truly appreciate the remarkable movement in the composition. The pinwheel composition formed by the arm of St. Mark and the turbaned servant gives off an incredible sense of movement that's not generally characteristic of Titian. Like the Mannerists, Tintoretto had to respond to the same type of concluding perfection in his predecessor's work, and this is Tintoretto's Last Supper. A new focus on intensity is brought to the fore as Tintoretto employed a sweeping diagonal, gloomy atmosphere, and a flurry of servants in his painting, all of which are absent from Leonardo's and other versions of the Last Supper. Now we look at the work of Paolo Veronese. And Veronese was most certainly an assistant to Titian for a time. More classical in nature than his contemporaries, Veronese often painted in a rather large scale, such as is the case with this painting. Originally titled The Last Supper, Veronese had to testify to the Holy Inquisition in defense of the painting. Rather than change his painting, he renamed it. Some of the accounts of his defense of this painting are quite hilarious, as he tries to explain why he's got dogs and buffoons and everything else present at the Last Supper. Another work by Veronese which reveals a certain tension in his painting is The Triumph of Venice. The odd angle contradicts our expectation for the ceiling fresco and contributes a certain instability or sense of movement to the work, more in keeping with Tintoretto. Now for some final thoughts on the Venetians. In conclusion, if you don't like Venetian painting, you don't like painting. Many modern ideas originate in this time and place with artists of still present influence.